Okay, so to the academic material today, the main thing I want to do is flesh out the concepts of decidability and undecidability. And what we're going to see in particular is the first main theorems of the course, which show the existence of a language that's undecidable, but nonetheless semi-decidable. So show that semi-decidability, when you get positive information about a word being in a language, decidability, which is when you get information both ways. You get the information also if that you can be told that a word is not in the language in the case of decidability. But before going to that, I want to just finish off on Turing machines. So last week we looked at Turing machines, working on Turing machines in the exercise classes, and I ended the lecture saying that we've looked at one particular variant of the notion of Turing machine, the one I considered last week, is single tape machines with an infinite tape in both directions in a single head. And we considered a lot of variations on this theme, so I mentioned them. I want to go through one of those variations in a bit more detail. I'm not going to take very long over it. And give you a little bit of a flavor of how you show that the different variations of Turing machines are all as powerful as each other. So the particular one I'm going to look at is multi-tape Turing machines, or multi means more than one. And in particular, when one's talking about a physical machine, we're going to have a fixed number. That number will be 7K, which we've already looked at one tape machines. We're going to look at K tape machines. And I don't want to go into a great deal of detail, so we're going to do it mainly by example. It's not too hard to generalize the example. And if you look, I've expanded the lecture notes from last week. If you look at the expanded lecture notes, the generalization is done technically in that expanded note. But you can probably do it yourself anyway. So the example is going to be in the case k equals 2, so that I have to write the smallest amount that I need to write for a more than one tape Turing machine. So I'm going to look at an example where we have 2 tapes. So here's the first one. And as one often does this with a multi-tape Turing machine, so here's the second one. One often starts off the computation with the input word on the first tape. So my input word, let's keep it short, is going to be ABB. And we started the computation with the second tape completely blank. But that's not the only thing one does with multi-tape machines. I'll say something else next week, something different next week. And then each of these tapes has its own head. And we start, again, the machine just has a single state that it's in. And as before, we start in the state start. As always, we have a tape alphabet. So in this case, my tape alphabet is going to be like last week, the letters A and B, and you always have the blank symbol in the tape alphabet. And we always require all but finitely many symbols of both tapes to be blank. And we have a set of states, which is a finite set of states. And in this case, in the case of the machine I'm going to do, the states are called start, back, match, accept, reject. In fact, I'm only going to give you a teaser for this machine. A teaser is a little teaser that sort of might interest you in it, but I'm not going to complete the definition. The completion of this definition will be the answer to one of the exercises in the exercise class. On the other hand, you can answer that in your own way too. You don't need to complete my definition, and I'm not going to tell you which exercise. But in any case, I'm just going to start off giving you an idea of how the machine looks. So here we've got a starting configuration, and to compute with the machine, we just need to know what the transition function is. So the transition function, again, I'm going to specify by a finite set of instructions, but as I've said, I'm not going to give you all the instructions this time, I'm just going to start it off. So because we've got two tapes, the instructions need to have a slightly different format. The other instructions were particularly tailored to just having one tape. So in this case, we want to say what we do in a configuration in which we're in the start state. And now, instead of just having one symbol here, we give an instruction. The instruction can depend on, we see two symbols, one on each tape. So the instruction is going to depend on what we see on the two tapes. So in the case that we're in, that we see an A on the first tape and a blank on the second tape, in that case, my instruction is going to keep us in the start state. It's going to keep an A on the first tape. It's going to write an A onto the second tape. It's going to move the top head one to the right, and it's going to move the bottom head one to the left. So that's going to take us into, so we stay in the start state, we keep the A on the top tape, we put an A on the bottom tape, we move the head on the first tape one to the right, the head on the second tape onto the left. So we're looking at a blank square now on the second tape. So we're now in a position where we see B on the first tape, blank on the second tape, and we're still in the start state. The instruction for that is if we see a B and a blank, then we stay in the start state. We keep the B on the first tape, we put a B on the second tape. Again, we go one to the right on the first tape and one to the left on the second tape. So we're staying in the start state, keeping the B here, putting a B here, going one to the left. Now the same instruction applies again because we're still in the start state. We see a B on the first tape, a blank on the second tape. So we stay in the start state, we keep the B here, we put a B on the second tape, we go one to the right on the first tape. We're now looking at a blank square, and we go one to the left. The second tape, again, we're looking at a blank square. So we now need to know what the start state does when it sees blanks. So it now sees a blank on both tapes. There's another instruction for that in the start state. When you see a blank on both tapes, you don't stay in the start state. You go to the back state. And back state, we keep the blanks on both tapes, and we keep the first tape head where it is, so this gets a 0, and we move the second tape one to the head on the second tape one to the right. Okay, so we move to the back state. We keep the blanks, we keep the first head where it is, and we move the second tape one to the right. I'm just going to do one more step, and then that's going to be the end of the T set. So we're now in the back state, we see a blank on the first tape and a B on the second tape, and in that case, see a blank on the first tape, B on the second tape, and in that case, we stay in the back state. We keep the blank, keep the B, we keep the head on the first tape where it is, and we move the head on the second tape one to the right. So everything stays the same, except this moves one to the right. And I'm going to stop there. But just to tell you where it's going, this head's going to go all the way to the right. It's going to stop here, and then it's going to do something. Both heads are going to work their way to the left after that. But this is where I'm stopping the simulation of the machine. but you get the idea how there's two. I mean, maybe you already did these in the exercise class. The online simulator uses multi-tape machines potentially, so maybe you already did such things in the exercise class. So the general, to specify such a multi-tape machine, to specify a k-tape machine, what do we need to give? We need to give tape alphabet gamma, with again the blank symbol that's contained in the tape alphabet. We know that, so I'm not going to write down that information again. A finite set of states Q, and the transition function, which now has a different type from the type of the transition function before, because it now takes a triple of things as its input. Oh, sorry, but this is a k-tape machine. So in the case of a k-tape machine, well, it's going to take a state together with k different symbols, because we'll have k different heads on the one for each tape, looking at k different symbols. So the information it's going to take for its argument is the state that we're currently at, together with a k tuple of tape symbols, one for each of the tapes, which the symbols, the tuple of tapes that the k heads are looking at. And the instruction takes us, it's a partial function, it's defined on some set of such pairs, not pairs, but k plus one tuples here, k tuple plus a state. And what it takes us to is, again, a new state, together with a k tuple of symbols, which are the symbols we're going to overwrite at the positions of the k tape heads, together with a k tuple of directions, of displacements of the tape heads. So we've got the k heads, each head can have its own displacement, as we've already seen in the example. So the general transition function is going to be a partial function of this kind, taking this as its argument and returning the 2k plus 1 tuple of big pieces of information. And once again, and these are all finite sets, so any such function is specified by a finite amount of information, which you can view as a finite list of instructions like this. Okay, and that's everything we need to specify a k-tape machine. So what I want to show you is, very briefly, without too many details. If you want to see too many details, look in the notes where there are, in my view, too many details. I mean, I wrote it up because I thought it would be a good thing to do, but it's a lot of detail there. So what I want to show you, without so many details, is why such machines are equivalently powerful to one-tape machines. So it's obvious that such machines are at least as powerful as one-tape machines, because we've got a one-tape machine plus more in a k-tape machine. So the more interesting thing is, how do we know that k-tape machines are not strictly more powerful than one-tape machines? And the way we show that is we show that we can simulate any k-tape machine by an appropriate simulating one-tape machine. So we take a k-tape machine like this one, we're going to define a one-tape machine which simulates the behavior of the k-tape machine. And I'm going to, as I say, do it with as few details as possible, I think. Come on. Oh. Sorry, I was saying come on to the camera. So we want to see how we can simulate, so simulating a k-tape machine Let's try again. By a untyped machine. Actually, I wanted to put names in. So simulating a k-tape machine M by a one-tape machine M twiddles. This symbol's called tilde. So you might say M tilde, but a lot of people call it twiddles. So I'm going to call it twiddles. It comes more naturally to me. So basically, how do we define M twiddles from the machine M? Well, we're going to define, so this is going to be a one-tape machine. It's going to have its own tape alphabet, gamma twiddles. It's going to have its own set of states, q twiddles, and it's going to have its transition function, delta twiddles. And lots of twiddles. And I'm actually not going to tell you what all these things are. That would be too much detail. And in fact, I don't even give that amount of detail in the notes. I mean, so part of, so you could, as an exercise for the masochistic among you, go through the lecture notes and add even more detail to what's already there. Gamma twiddles is easy. So gamma twiddles is the tape alphabet gamma together with two new special symbols. So I'm going to assume, so this means disjoint union. I'm unioning with two new symbols. So I'm assuming these are not in gamma. And I'm going to write two symbols that are sort of suggestive of what they're going to do. So my new symbols are going to be a triangle and a pair of parallel bars. And what I'm going to say about the q twiddles, the set of new, so we're going to have new states. The set of states of the new machine, it's going to contain a subset of states, special ones that we call now sub q, one for every state in the original machine q. The idea is that our simulating machine is going to go in the now sub q state at the moment that it is simulating a configuration of the machine M in state q. I mean, that's a lot of words to follow, but I'm going to illustrate it, and then hopefully you'll understand the idea from the illustration. Let me just write the general thing down first, which is what I just said, but the configuration, I should say. The configuration. So I just write config dot the configuration of M, of our multi-tape machine M in state Q is encoded by a configuration of a single tape machine and twiddles in state now circuit. So if we were going to simulate this machine that I didn't complete writing on the board here, we were going to try and understand how that works by having a look at what the configuration that our simulating machine M twiddles would be in when the machine, two-tape machine, is in this configuration. So this is actually, this part in green is a configuration of the machine. A configuration consists of the two tape contents together with the head positions at a particular state in time, together with the state that the machine is in at that point in time in the execution. So here we've got a simulation, a configuration of two-tape machine. And this is going to be simulated by the following configuration of the one-tape machine. So, for example, the configuration on the other board is encoded by following configuration of our single machine. And the idea is very simple. You simply write the tape content of the two tapes onto a single tape. I mean, it's pretty, there are many ways of doing it, but this is as good a way as any other. And what are these symbols used for? Well, we'll see. They're sort of for parsing that information. Well, the double bars are used to separate the contents of one tape from the contents of another. So I'm not going to write all the squares for the blank bits of tape, but the configuration is always going to start with a double bar. So this says we're starting the contents of the first tape. And the contents of the first tape here is A, B, B, blank. Well, there's a slight issue that you have on the two tape machine, we've got two heads to put in, whereas on the one tape machine, we've only got one head. So we can only put it in one place. So on the one tape machine, we actually put the head right at the left of all the information we're putting in. And the point of the triangle symbol is we're going to write the head positions of the other two tapes onto this tape here. So we're going to record the head positions by actually putting the head positions into the tape. So this ABB blank is actually going to be, so this is tape one, the contents of tape one here. We now put the triangle in because the head position is on the first tape is to the right of the second B. And we'll follow it by the blank square that this is pointing at. And then we put the double bar in to say we've reached the end of the encoding of the first tape. And then we put the information for the second tape in, but the squares that we're using involve this blank square here. So we're going to have blank. And then we got B. And then the head on the second tape points at the second B, so the head goes in. We put the head to the left of the square it's pointing at. I mean, it's a convention. You could go to the right if you wanted to. The A. And that's all the information we need to have on the single tape of the M-Twiddles machine. And the M-Twiddles machine needs to be in a particular state, and it's in the state now Q. I mean, we could just call this state Q, sorry, not now Q, now sub back. Of course, we could have actually just included these states in Q twiddles. It doesn't really matter. I find it convenient to label them like this, because then one needs to think about how our single tape machine is going to compute. So we need to give it a transition function that's going to compute. And the idea is, whenever our two tape machine in this case makes a transition, so that's a step from one configuration to the next configuration, we want our single tape machine to make a step from the encoding of that configuration to the encoding of the destination configuration. Okay? So it wants to simulate the single step of computation that's made here. But actually, the encoding machine is going to take many steps to do that, because to do that, what it needs to do, its head's here, it sort of runs all the way through from left to right, looking for the triangle symbols, which represent where the heads are on the multi-tape machine. Whenever it comes to a triangle symbol, picking up the state, the symbol to the right of it, and recording that somehow in the state here. So there are going to be lots of states that pick up that information This head's going to scan from left to right, and by the time it gets to the right-hand side, it's going to know that it's found two heads, and it's found the two heads, and the first one had a blank, and the second one had a D. And that's going to be encoded in the state. Can I just finish, and then I'll ask, and then I'll ask you what the question is. And then having done that, it has some instructions appropriate to whatever's in the transition relation here, and those are encoded in the transition relations. Enough information is encoded in the state here to say we know what we're going to replace the A and the B line. We know how we're going to move these heads, and it goes back. It replaces sorry, not the A and the B and the blank, and it moves the head accordingly. And moving the head accordingly is also a little bit subtle, because if the head's right at the end, as it is here, if we move the head right, then we need to create some more space. At that point, the single tape machine has to go into a kind of special routine that it wipes off this bit of tape and shifts it all to the left or something like that to create some more space. That can be done. But in any way, you can do that in such a way. If you want to see more details, you can look at the notes. Such that by the time you get back here, you're now in the correct destination state from the single step here, which will again be another configuration within the state now, in this case. Okay, so there was a better. Okay, right, good. The video is totally blurred, which is very bad. Yeah, okay. So that's it. That's basically the idea. Every step of computation of the single tape of the multi-tape machine is simulated by quite a lot of steps of computation of the single step machine. Nonetheless, hopefully you can see that that's how it can be done. And that's as much of the detail I'm going to go into on that. Okay. Right. So we'll take from that, and as I say, look at the notes if you want to see more details. We'll take from that take it now as understood that multi-tape machines are no more powerful than single-tape machines, modulo the fact that they can do things a bit more quickly. Yes?
The amount of details that you just presented should be enough for the oral exam. Just want to frame.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm for the oral exam. Yeah, I mean, the amount of details with the understanding to back it up. Yes. I mean, you should understand how it works. It's actually quite a fun exercise to completely work out such an encoding for one single tape machine yourself. Oh, sorry, not two tape machine. I mean, I wouldn't go beyond 2 tapes, but it's for people who like programming. It's the sort of thing that you can enjoy if you're in the right frame of mind. Right. So let's see where we want to go from here. Okay, so we've considered different kinds of Turing machines, the single tape and multi-tape in a lot of detail, well, some detail. I mentioned several other machines in the previous lecture. Now that we accept that they're all the same, they're all equivalent, we'll take single tape machine as the sort of canonical notion, but we'll feel free to use a multi-tape machine whenever it's more convenient to do so. And now we can start to ask questions like, well, we've got this notion of what it means for a language to be decidable, that is, there exists a machine that will accept a word if it's in the language and reject a word if it's not in the language, and semi-decidable, there exists a machine that will accept a word if it's in the language, but we don't have any guarantees of what it will do if the word won't be accepted for the words that aren't in the language. And we're going to now see about, basically most of the languages one easily comes up with are decidable languages. And this is going back historically, it was an interesting question whether certain, as we discussed last week, whether certain mathematical problems amounted to decidable languages, and the answers to these questions that they weren't decidable languages turned out to be major mathematical advances, such as solutions to problems posed by Hilbert. And essentially, the discovery that there are mathematical properties that cannot be done by algorithms or by computation. So we're now going to look at that kind of question using the notion of a Turing machine. So, I am about to move the camera. Yes, thank you. If the camera will, it's a very stubborn camera, this one. Right. So let's look at Turing machines that accept languages, because if we're looking at the decidable or undecidable languages, each one is recognized by a particular Turing machine. So a Turing machine, and we'll look at single take ones. So a Turing machine N that accepts, that recognizes a language. So it's specified by a finite amount of information. It's a single take machine, it's a take alphabet, the finite amount of information is the finite take alphabet, the finite set of states, the finite transition function. So it's specified a finite amount of information. So let's call that gamma Q delta. As you may remember from basic set theory, like logic and Logitza in the first year, for those of you who did the undergraduate course here, one can essentially enumerate one's way through all ways of specifying finite amounts of information. So we can list all Turing machines up to equivalence. Trying to find my notes here just to see. So we can enumerate all possible single take Turing machines. So let's do that. So the first Turing machine, the second Turing machine, the third Turing machine, the fourth Turing machine, and so on. I mean, we'll assume that we're saying taking, we've got some countably infinite set of symbols we can potentially use to take symbols for states, and that determines what mathematical, what kind of mathematical structure delta can be. It's always a finite partial function based on these finite sets here. And hopefully everyone has seen things like this, that one can systematically go through all possible combinations of sets of symbols, sets of states and partial functions on them, and enumerate them all in some infinite list, but nonetheless, it's countable. It's a countable set of things. So therefore, each one of these Turing machines recognizes one language, namely the language recognized by that Turing machine, as defined last week. So each TM recognizes one language. But here, recognizes in general means semi-decides. It's the language of words accepted by that Turing machine. semi-decides one language. So we have so let's fix some sigma. So let's assume that we're always considering only those Turing machines where gamma contains some finite sigma that we're interested in, and we're only interested in language recognition for the words over the alphabet sigma from some given alphabet. It doesn't matter really what sigma is, but it's sufficient, it's always sufficient just to consider sigma to be the set 0, 1 of just binary bits. It doesn't really matter what sigma is. For any sigma, we can consider the set of semi-decidable languages. That's a subset of the set of all languages. And the language was just defined to be a set of words. So the set of all languages is the power set of the set of strings. Okay. So this is power set with the set of all subsets. This is the set of all subsets of the set of all sets of words. Every such thing is a language. The set of semi-decidable languages. So a semi-decidable language is a language. So this is a subset here. But because each Turing machine, the set of semi-decidable languages, each one is given by, well, maybe many Turing machines, but still we're enumerating, but here we have an enumeration with repetitions essentially of the set of semi-decidable languages. This is a countable set. We can enumerate it. We get the first semi-decidable language, the second semi-decidable language, the third one, which may agree with the first, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, we're listing all the semi-decidable languages in a list. So this is a countable set. And as you may know, this is a countably infinite set, and the power set of any countably infinite set is an uncountably infinite set. That's Cantor's theorem from set theory. So this is this here is an uncountable set. So just for these reasons, which are to do with cardinality, the size of infinite sets, this set is countable, this set is uncountable. There necessarily exists a language that's not semi-decidable. Okay. In fact, there exist uncountably many. This is just a tiny fraction of the set of all, an insignificant fraction of the set of all languages. And if we look at the set of decidable languages, well, every decidable language is a fortiori semi-decidable. Decidability is a stronger property. That's again a countable set. So the conclusion of all of this is, therefore, this is the English language symbol for therefore, there exist languages, in fact, uncountably many, that are not semi-decidable. Hence, they are undecidable. Okay, so there exist undecidable languages. Anyway, this is something we're very we accept as part of culture nowadays. We can't expect computers to do every possible mathematical task. That's just, they can do all computational tasks. Most natural mathematical tasks turn out to be computational tasks. It turns out some natural mathematical tasks are not computational tasks, and that's when things become interesting. so this kind of consideration, so this is very general. It's just based on being able to enumerate the set of Turing machines. What it's done is it's established a proper subset inclusion here. Some people sometimes write this like this, a subset or equal with a not equals there. But so this is a subset, but it's not the whole set of semi-decidable languages is not the whole of the set of all languages. But we haven't addressed whether this, does not answer whether or not this is the proper subset inclusion. So the main results today is going to be there exists a language that is semi-decidable but not decidable. And moreover, it's going to not just be there exists one, but we're going to construct a particular one, and it's going to be a particularly natural one in some ways. Right, okay, it's basically 3 o'clock, so we will start again at basically 3:15. And if there are any questions. Okay, so let's get started again. Right, so to remind you where we are, we're going to be proving the following main goal. So the goal we've set ourselves is to prove the following. There exists a language, and we're going to actually construct one that is semi-decidable, but not decidable. It's kind of really important fact. So, well, it's not just the fact that's important. All the techniques that go into this are of fundamental importance to the course. So anyway, I'm going to highlight that. And in order to motivate the approach, I'll go on the other board. I want to just think a little bit about Turing machines from a modern day perspective, which is, of course, not how Turing thought of them, because he wasn't from the modern day. So let me just. So from a modern day perspective, so we've got the idea, we've got the notion of the Turing machine. I'm just trying to find the place in my notes. We can think of a Turing machine. I was motivating it, and Turing was motivating it as a formalization, a precise formalization of the notion of algorithm. So this isn't the twiddles as before, the same symbol. It's a kind of it's basically the same thing as it's analogous to or similar to, or even can be taken as a definition of an algorithm in this case. But from a modern day perspective, what is it? Well, it's a machine, so it's a piece of hardware, as opposed to computers we're familiar with. Computers we're familiar with, you can program, you can put lots of different algorithms on them, but the Turing machine as defined, which has its transition function built into it, it's a piece of hardware that only has one program. So it's a piece of hardware with a fixed program, essentially.
Game Boy.
Sorry?
Old age Game Boy.
Is it the one, sorry?
An old age Game Boy, which is the name.
Well, if you're right, although it might not indeed be a game in this case, but indeed, I mean, there are plenty of bits of hardware that only run one program. The washing machine, for example. So anyway, hardware. Although people talk about programmable washing machines, which means you have like 3 or 4 different. Well, actually, much more than that. But anyway, never mind. Hardware with one fixed program. So that raises the question, is there any way in which we can actually program a Turing machine? In fact, the answer is in a sense yes. So that there is a particular Turing machine that acts like a programmable computer, like a modern computer that you can write any program for, and it will then execute that program. So Turing showed that the particular Turing machine, very important one, the particular Turing machine, TM, the universal Turing machine, is programmable in modern day terminology. So maybe it can be programmed to act like any TM. It's a single machine that, given any other Turing machine, you can find a program you can give to the universal Turing machine, and that program will tell the universal Turing machine to act like the Turing machine you identified in the first place. So the way this works precisely is the universal Turing machine, I'll just write UTM for it, takes as input, so it's a Turing machine, so it needs to take as input a word on its tape. It takes as input a word of the form, and it takes as input words in a very particular form. I'm going to write them like this, M in angled brackets, followed by W in angled brackets. This is not the specific word, but it's rather a format for the kind of word that you can give as input on the universal Turing machine. The bullet is just a symbol from the alphabet that we're going to use for the universal Turing machine. And the point is, this is a word that encodes a Turing machine M, and this is a word that encodes an input word W. I mean, an input word W could just be itself, but it's not going to be. We're going to instead encode it. So we give it this information, which you'll see how this works in more detail in a moment. So this is in an encoding of a Turing machine M as a word, and this is the encoding of the word W as a word. Well, why would you want to encode the word as a word? Well, you do that so that the word, the encoding of word here is in the right input alphabet to give it to the universal Turing machine. So this is going to be a word belonging to the set of words over a particular alphabet sigma, the universal alphabet sigma. And again, this is also going to be the same alphabet. And the bullet symbol is also going to be that alphabet. Anyway, so we give the universal Turing machine an input of this form. We can give it other inputs, but then if we give it another input, it might just do something silly. But if we give it an input of this form, then what the universal Turing machine does is it simulates the behavior of the Turing machine M on the input word W. The UTM then simulates the execution of the Turing machine and on the input word W. So what I need to tell you first is how to encode a Turing machine as a word and how to encode a word as a word. It sounds trivial, but it's easier anyway than encoding the Turing machine. But we want to get everything over the same universal alphabet. So, before doing that, just to say, in a sense, this was a remarkable insight of Turing, this universal machine, because now from the perspective, the modern day perspective where we have programmable computers, it's kind of an obvious thing to ask. But at that point, the idea of having a machine that you could program, could take as input a program, if you like, but this is the program here, this encoding the Turing machine. The idea of having a programmable computer didn't exist, so in a sense, Turing invented that idea, albeit in this very theoretical form. But Turing, it wasn't lost to Turing, the idea that this could actually be a practical thing, because Turing was one of the pioneers of in the actual development of real physical computers as well. Later. So we're going to restrict ourselves to one-take Turing machines because we've seen one-take Turing machines are enough. We're going to introduce the encoding angle bracket M, or encoding of M, of a Turing machine M, given by a tape alphabet, set of states, and a transition function. And now I need to refer to my notes to remember what the notation is. Okay, we're going to encode this as a word. This is going to be a word over a universal alphabet. So, it's a word over the universal alphabet. So sigma U. So what is the universal alphabet? Well, it could be, if one were doing things in practice, it could just be 0, 1. We could do everything just using binary words if we wanted to. However, that would make it pretty unreadable what's going to follow. So rather than using binary words, I'm still going to use 0 and 1. I'm also going to give myself a -1. I'm going to give myself an open square brackets, a closed square brackets, the double bar we've already used, and a bullet. What LaTeX calls a bullet. Anyway. And this is just for convenience. And if you wanted to use 0s and 1s, you could simply say, well, we've got less than 8 characters here, and we encode each one of these as a symbol of three 0s and 1s in combination. So we want to encode the tape alphabet and the states and the transition function, and put them all together in a word that represents the whole Turing machine. So each state, we're going to take it one component at a time. So each state Q belongs to. So each state little q belonging to the set of states Q. We encode as a word encoding of Q. So these angle brackets are always going to mean encoding whatever's in the angle bracket as a word. And this is going to be the word over universe. Actually, I'm only going to use the symbols -1, 0, and 1 for this. And they're all going to be, every state is going to be encoded as a sequence of -1 zeros and 1s of the same length L. For some suitable L, such that, and I'm encoding Turing machines that act as language acceptors. So such Turing machines always have a start state, and I'm going to require the start state to be the sequence of L zeros, which I write as 0 to the L. So that's just the word that consists of L zeros in succession. The accept state I'm going to require to be the sequence of L ones. And the reject state I'm going to be required to be the sequence of L -1. Doesn't matter, it's just convenient to have some conventions. Where L is some fixed number that allows us to encode all states, can anyone see what number L needs to be at least to allow that? So every state is going to be represented by a word of the same length. So, and we need to make sure that L is large enough to be able to encode all the finitely many states of the Turing machine M as sequences of -1 zeros and 1s of precisely length L. So where L is at least some chosen number, which is at least, what's the bound on L? Sorry, yeah.
The rate of base to be size.
Indeed. Logarithm base 3 of the size of Q. In the notes, I notice I put a ceiling here to take this up to a whole number. But since L is a whole number anyway, there's just enough to have. Don't actually need it in the formula. Okay. So that's encoding states. The same way we're going to encode each symbol in the tape alphabet gamma. So similarly, we encode every symbol tape alphabet gamma by some encoding of A as a word again. So this again, and we're again going to allow ourselves to use -1, 0, and 1. And we're again going to require every symbol to have an encoding of the same length M here, where in this case M needs to be, of course, greater than log to the base 3 of cardinality of gamma, the size of gamma. And again, I'm going to require, we have the tape alphabet always contains the blank symbol, and again, I'm going to require a standard encoding of the blank symbol. So I'm going to require that the encoding of the blank symbol is the sequence of M zeros in succession. Okay, so in this way, we've kind of encoded gamma, we've encoded Q, or we know how to encode the elements of gamma, the elements of Q. How do we encode every instruction? That's the main remaining bit of thing we need to do before we can piece all the bits together and encode the whole of the Turing machine as a single word. So let's So remember the transition function, it's a partial function, it can be viewed as a finite list of instructions. Each instruction says what we do in the circumstance that the machine is in a particular state and the tape head looks at a particular symbol. And then we have a triple of pieces of information that we use in such a case. So we encode a single instruction in delta. So the notation I was using in the lectures of an instruction in delta is of the form, if we're in the current state Q, for some particular state Q, and the current head symbol sees the character A for some character A in the tape alphabet, then we go to the configuration, we replace the current configuration with one that we have a new state Q prime. Let me just stay consistent with my notes. A new symbol, we replace the A on the tape with a symbol B on the tape, and we move the tape head by a displacement D. So where here Q and Q prime belong to Q, the set of states Q, little a and b belong to the tape alphabet gamma, and the displacement is how we move the tape head by at most one square left or right. And we're going to encode each individual instruction as a word over the universal alphabet. So each individual instruction is encoded as the word and this is where we're going to use these kind of punctuation symbols, if you like. And the point of these punctuation symbols is really just to make things readable. One could manage basically without them if one wanted to be economical. It's nice to be able to read what we're doing. So we start the encoding of each instruction with the open square brackets. We follow that by the encoding of the state Q, so that's a single symbol. We follow that by the encoding of the state Q, that's L symbols in length. We follow that by a bullet to separate the encoding of the state Q from the encoding of the state, not the state of the symbol A, which is L symbols in length. We now put a bar in to separate the left hand and the right hand side of the arrow. We could use a dot because we would know this is the second. So we could use a bullet because it's the second bullet. You would know this has a special function, but still it's more readable to. I mean, I could actually put an arrow in that would be even more readable. Never mind. Q. So we then follow that simply by this triple of information. So the encoding of the state Q prime. That's again L symbols in length. A bullet. Encoding of the symbol B, that's again N symbols in length, another bullet, and D itself is -1001. So we have that in the alphabet, so we can just use the whichever one it is. That's simply a single symbol. And the length of this, well, we've got twice L plus twice M plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, including D, 7 other symbols. So it's a word of length. So every instruction has the same, every individual instruction has the same length, and it's 2L plus 2M plus 7. The length of each word. And finally, then, encoding of the Turing machine M is the word start, which we know is 0000 L many times, and we put this here in order to tell us what L is. That's the function of putting this in. So we get L many zeros, so we find out what L is. We find out how many, what a bound number of states is, but in particular how many symbols we're using to represent them. A bullet to tell us we've finished that, followed by the encoding of blank, which plays again exactly the same role. It tells us what n is, so how many symbols in the universal alphabet we're using to encode each symbol in the original alphabet gamma. And then we simply follow this by a list of the encodings of instructions, one for each instruction. There are finitely many instructions, and we just put them all as a list. So let's say this is Q. First one is Q1 bullet A1 bar Q1 prime bullet A1 prime. So B1, let's say, just keep things similar. Encoding of B1. D1, so that's the encoding of the first instruction. Dot, dot, dots, there are k many instructions, say, so we'll have k many such things in square brackets, qk, bullet, ak, bar, qk prime, bullet, ek, okay, so just a list of encodings of instructions. In fact, one has trivial Turing machines that don't come with any instructions. They just halt immediately in the start state, and there's no instruction telling what to do. So for such a thing, the encoding of the Turing machine would simply stop at this point. There wouldn't be any information after it. But for most interesting, well, for all interesting Turing machines, there's going to be a sequence of instructions. That sequence will be a finite list of things. Doesn't matter what order they appear in. Each one is the legitimate encoding of that Turing machine. But you can, to have a chosen encoding of a Turing machine, you can list those instructions in some canonical order. Right. So that's the encoding of the Turing machine. What about the encoding of a word, W? So here, W is a word over gamma, over the tape alphabet. In fact, normally we would, in general, for the input words, we don't allow it to contain blanks, but still it's going to be useful for what follows to know how to encode an arbitrary word over the tape alphabet as a word over the universal alphabet. So for a word over the tape alphabet of the Turing machine M, the word over the universal alphabet, so the encoding of the word over the universal alphabet, gamma U. Can I call it gamma U? It should be sigma U. I don't remember what I wrote before, but if I wrote gamma U, it shouldn't be sigma U. Anyway, the encoding as a word over the sigma alphabet is, well, one could simply take, if W, suppose W is W1, W1 is the first symbol through to WK is the last symbol of the word, you can simply take the encodings of all the symbols W1 through to WK and simply concatenate them together. And that would be okay as long as you know the length of the encoding of a single symbol, which we do know because we've recorded that information. So that would work. Nonetheless, for convenience, I think it's nice to put a bullet in as a separator, just for readability. So I'm going to encode this as W1, the encoding of the symbol W1, followed by a bullet, followed by the encoding of the symbol W2, followed by a bullet, all the way through the encoding of the symbol W. Let's have some other symbol, let's say WM. So where the word W is the sequence of characters W1 through to WM. Okay. In my notes, I actually number things I've just realised in my notes I number things with indices from 0 up to n-1. So it obviously doesn't matter, but it would be good. It would have been better. Let's maybe do that. Just to maintain consistency. Okay, so that is how we encode a Turing machine and a word, and our language that is decidable, that's not, sorry, that's semi-decidable but not decidable, we can now define. Define the following language. We're going to call it L-exact. And this is the language of all words of the form n, bullet, encoding of n, bullet, encoding of w, where n is a Turing machine, where I'm considering Turing machines as a language acceptors, and W is the input word, W belongs to gamma minus box of the Turing machine, and n accepts W. Okay. And we're going to prove two results about this. Theorem 1, L exact is undecidable. Theorem 2, L exact is semi-decidable. But for theorem 2, I'm going to have to tell you what how this universal Turing machine works. But I told you that we're encoding these Turing machines in order to provide them as programs, if you like, as inputs to the universal Turing machine. But for theorem 1, we don't actually need the universal Turing machine. We can prove that straight away. So let's do that now, and then we'll have the break. And then in the third part, we'll look at the universal Turing machine and prove theorem 2. So let's prove that this language is undecidable. Let's see how long it's going to be. Right, so I'll try to fit it on this board, but we'll see. Yeah, they want to prove the language is undecidable, so that means there is no Turing machine that decides the language. So, as a proof of the negation statement, we're going to do the usual thing. We assume that there is a Turing machine that decides the language, and we're going to reach a contradiction. So, suppose, or I mean, English mathematics, one sometimes writes a contradiction like this. I know you write two opposing arrows in Slovene, but suppose this means the contradiction. Suppose the contradiction that you have a Turing machine. But what do I call it? So the L accept is decidable. And let D be capital D. Let D be a Turing machine that decides it. Well, this is a language over the universal alphabet, so it better be a Turing machine with input language, the universal alphabet. There'd be a Turing machine with input language. It may have other things, and other symbols in its language, in its alphabet, but with input alphabet, sorry. Sigma that decides it. That decides L accept. And the point is, we're going to manipulate D to define a new Turing machine that basically has the opposite behavior of D, and that's going to, as it turns out, give us a contradiction. So we define a new Turing machine, N, we should think of as the negation of D, that works as follows. So define a new Turing machine, negation of D. So D decides this language, it accepts every word in the language and rejects every word not in the language. That's our assumption. We define a new TMN that behaves as follows. That behaves as follows. So firstly, N reads its input string. B say, B be the input string. And it converts it. So it does something fancy. It converts B to the string B bullet encoding of B. It's a weird thing to do. Resetting its head to the left of the input, the left of the take content, let's say. So it reads V, it keeps V on the tape, it follows V by a bullet, and then having done that, it adds a new string over the same alphabet, the universal alphabet, which is our encoding of the, remember we're encoding the whole tape alphabet of D, so in particular, we're encoding sigma U, because that's the input alphabet of D. And so it's basically going to here replace V by the sequence of encoding symbols from V. That's clearly something a Turing machine can do. It's easy to read the symbols and replace them by the encoded symbols, actually separated by bullets. So why is it doing this? Well, kind of the idea is you want to think of N as getting an input that's the encoding of a Turing machine. And when it gets the input that's the encoding of a Turing machine, it's going to leave the encoding of the Turing machine on the input tape, followed by some string that encodes followed by our encoding of the encoding of the Turing machine. The reason for the last part will become clear in a moment. So once we've done this, we've now got something new on the tape. We started off with V, we now have this on the tape. We've reset our head to the left-hand side of this. The Turing machine N now proceeds as the machine D, our assumed machine D. So N now proceeds, so it switches a bit to start proceeding as D proceeds, except for one thing, well, two things if you like. So it computes, it carries on computing now from this as machine D. The only thing it does is when machine D terminates, which is bound to do because D decides a language, so D is guaranteed to terminate and either accept or reject for any input string. When D terminates, N flips the result of machine D. So if machine D accepted, N rejects, and if machine D rejected, N accepts. So if D accepts, if D ends in an accept state, when D accepts state, and ends halts, if you like, in reject, and if conversely, if D and halts, I should have said halts in the reject state, and halts in the accept state. Obviously, you can write a machine N that does this. You simply borrow the transition table from D, but when D goes to accept, you just call that state reject, and when D goes to reject, you just call that state accept. So it's kind of obvious that you can do this manipulation with D. Okay, it's a weird thing to do. Why do this? Well, because it works, basically, as we're now going to see. So let's consider the behavior of the T of our new Turing machine N. If we give it the encoding, as I said, we want to think of V as the encoding of the Turing machine. What happens if we actually give our machine N the encoding of the Turing machine? So consider the behavior for T if given an input string that encodes some Turing machine N. So in that case, sorry, I want to consider the behavior of N. Sorry, I want to consider the behavior of the machine we're defining. Yeah, we're given an input string N. So in that case, the first stage is encoding of M, followed by the encoding of it. So that's encoding a Turing machine as a string, and then encoding the machine, encoding the string as its own encoding on the tape. And then we're then running a decision thing D on this input, except negating the output. Well, let's figure. So the first stage leaves this on the tape. The subsequent, let's consider the subsequent execution of D before we negate it. So the subsequent execution of D unnegated proceeds as well, does enjoys, let's say, to state some properties. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find results in. So D will accept D itself will accept this. Because D is a decision machine for the language I'll accept. So if and only if M followed by the encoding of its encoding as a string belongs to I'll accept. If and only if the Turing machine M accepts input string encoding event. It accepts its own encoding as an input. And so likewise, because the machine D decides the language I'll accept, the execution of D and to reject if and only if M, the encoding of M followed by the encoding of its encoding does not belong to I'll accept, if and only if M does not accept the input. So the execution of M, I'm just going to modify this. So N, sorry, the execution of negated D, which is how N is defined, we simply swap accept and reject it. Accept. So I think I do need, unfortunately, to use. We're nearly there. I mean, we're basically there, but I'm going to use the bottom of this board. Right. So the thing we do now is we consider what happens if we run N on its own encoding. So this is what N does on any input string that's the encoding of the Turing machine. So what happens if we run N on its own encoding? So in particular, so continuing the proof, in particular, if we run N on input its own encoding as a Turing machine, its own encoding of N as a string, the computation rejects if and only if it rejects if and only if N accepts input N input the encoding of N and accepts if and only if N rejects input the encoding of N. This is a contradiction because if N, the definition of N accepts input N is if we run N on input encoding of N, it accepts, but we're saying here it rejects if and only if that happens. So the behavior of N is self-contradictory. It's self-contradictory. Hence, our assumption at the beginning must have been wrong. D cannot exist. Okay. We're done. 5 minutes late, so we'll have a break till 20 past. Oh, well, actually, let's have a vote, which requires a 2/3 majority. 10-minute break and earlier finish. Yeah, that's about 15-minute break. Oh my goodness! Now, why did I say 2/3? I mean, there's a clear majority for the first. So sorry to people who wanted a longer break, myself included. Okay, so before moving on to the Turing machine, the universal Turing machine, I just want to give one little alternative perspective on the last proof, but I'm not going to actually elaborate it in a great deal of detail. But this way of looking at things is as follows. So we can look at our enumeration of Turing machines, so on. And for each Turing machine, we could look at an enumeration of all possible input words. And we could put a tick in every place in which the Turing machine accepts the input word. So, for example, maybe M1 accepts W1 and W4, but doesn't accept these. So let's just leave those blank. So I have a minimal amount to write, and maybe M2 accepts W2, and also W4 and W5. Maybe M3 just rejects everything, and M4 accepts W3 and W4, and M4 accepts here, and so on. So these are Turing machines, and our concatenation encoding of Turing machine MI with encoding of Turing machine WJ will have a tick by it. Well, we'll have a tick here if and only if that concatenation of the encodings is in the language I'll accept. Okay, that's how the language I'll accept is defined, those pairs of Turing machine together with an input it accepts. Now, what our Turing machine N is doing is it's doing a kind of diagonalization procedure where for each of these N's, when we input the encoding of a Turing machine, for that encoding of a Turing machine, we want the behavior of N to be different. We want to guarantee that the behavior of N, the N we've defined in the proof, this negated thing, is different from the behavior of the Turing machine that we give to it as input. So what N does is it says, okay, I'm given like M3 as the encoding of M3 is my input. I'm going to change my behavior, that is the behavior of N, from M3s on a particular input. And I'm going to make sure that IN, that I'm defining, the one that negates out of procedure D, I am different from the machine M3 on a given input. And in order to find an appropriate input to apply M3 to, we might as well use the encoding of M3 itself. I mean, it's a little bit more subtle than that, but we go here to the encoding of M3, which is somewhere in this list. And N looks to see what M3 did, because it applies the decision procedure D to M3 according to its own encoding. So it looks to see what M3 did, so maybe it was a tick, and then says, okay, I'm going to reject you. I'm going to, so N, so here we had a tick, sorry, a green tick. And now, instead here, N rejects encoding of M3. Okay, because N will reject. So I didn't follow the horizontal line very carefully. So N rejects and the encoding of M3. And in particular, N, for any encoding of a Turing machine MI, we'll look at the input corresponding to the encoding of MI there, and we'll make sure that N behaves differently from that Turing machine MI on that input, which is the encoding of the encoding of MI. Goodness, maybe I should have put another. No, this is right. Yeah. Anyway, so in doing so, it's like proofs by diagonalization. If you remember the proof that the real numbers are not countable, for example, where you go down a diagonal and you change every entry on the diagonal. Here, a diagonal is take a Turing machine, look at its corresponding opponent, its corresponding encoding as the input, change the behavior of N on that. So therefore, N cannot be any Turing machine because it differs from every Turing machine on its own input. Okay, so I just wanted to make that relationship to the diagonalization, proofs by diagonalization, which I guess you have seen before, even if we did in the distance past, and that kind of motivates why we take an input and we apply the input to its own encoding. Okay, right. Having got that out of the way, let us go to the universal Turing machine. Now, so we've now proved the undecidability. So undecidable means not decidable. We have proved that the language L accept is not decidable. The remaining theorem to prove theorem 2 is to prove that it is nonetheless semi-decidable. L accept is semi-decidable. That is, there is a Turing machine that recognizes that language. And to use that, we're going to need to use the universal Turing machine. So the idea of the universal Turing machine, universal Turing machine idea, which I've already written down, but just to remind you, so check we're on the right board. So given an input string of the form encoding a Turing machine bullet to separate encoding of word, the UTM simulates the behavior of machine M on input W. And what simulation means is it'll follow all the steps of M on W. And if the machine M on input W goes into an accept state, the UTM will go into an accept state. If M on W goes into a reject state, the UTM will go into the reject state. If M on W doesn't go into an accept or reject state, the UTM also won't go into an accept or reject state. So in particular, I'll write that as briefly as possible. In particular, the UTM simulation ends as false in accept or respectively reject if and only if the computation of, I'm not going to write that down, I'll just write M on W. So that's like one word, but the computation of M on W does the same. Respectively. So if this one accepts it and only if M on W accepts, and this one rejects it and only if M on W rejects. Okay. So how do we achieve this? How do we define this universal Turing machine that behaves in this way? So this is quite complicated. So again, the notes contain more details, but not all the details. It's a really great programming exercise for those of you who like very challenging, in this case, programming exercises, to try to write a universal Turing machine yourself. what I'm going to do is just illustrate how the universal Turing machine simulates the computational steps of a given Turing machine W, and leave the rest to looking at the notes to satisfy your own curiosity. Think about it yourself, and if you like this kind of thing, which if you're sort of a particular kind of disposition you may, I used to like this kind of thing, then you might want to try to fill in all the details. Now, once you manage to do that, a further challenge is to make the universal Turing machine as small as possible. That's there's still a research program. How small can universal Turing machines be? And hopefully, there we go. So the level of detail I want to do in the lecture is just going to be a sketch of how things work just using a couple of pictures, basically. Well, yeah. So the execution of the Turing, we want the universal Turing machine to simulate the execution of the Turing machine M on input W. So the execution of a Turing machine M on W, on input W, goes from configuration, so it's basic steps from configuration to configuration, starting in the start configuration, starting in the starting configuration in the start state with the W on input tape and the head at the left, and so on. We go from step from configuration, let's say steps, even though I want to emphasize it's a single step. Steps from configuration to configuration. Our typical configuration looks like this. We've got one tape. We have some portion of the tape that's non-blank. So this portion of the tape might have symbols A1 through to AK on it, and so on. And at some place, we've got some AI in the middle, which is where the tape head's pointing. And we're in some state, little cube state. So that's a typical configuration of the Turing machine M on W. And then it'll go to the next configuration. And we're going to use, for our universal Turing machine, we're going to define it as a 3-tape machine, which we can then be reduced to a 1-tape machine using the ideas at the beginning of the lecture. But it's to define the universal Turing machine, you want to give yourself, make things as easy for yourself as possible, because it's already quite tricky to do, and then reduce it to a standard reduction from multi-tape to single tape. So we define the UTM as a 3-tape that goes from single steps, from a configuration like this, a single step to the next configuration, to convert those to a multi-step computation of the universal Turing machine that uses multiple steps to transition between encodings of configurations of M. So the configuration of our starting machine M, like this, we're somewhere in the execution of M on W, we've got this on the tape. is converted to configuration of our 3-tape universal Turing machine. And it's the following configuration. So on tape 1, we simply have the encoding of the Turing machine and as a word. So that's our program that the universal Turing machine is executing, if you like it. As I said, it takes the encoding of the Turing machine and we think of as like a program, and we keep that. We start off with M followed by W on the first tape of the universal Turing machine's running. But the universal Turing machine will always leave M on the first tape, so it can refer to the program to see what to do. Okay, and it's going to have its head of the first tape at the left end of the program. It'll always be, so that's always the beginning of the encoding of the state start, as I recall. And the second tape, we have the encoding of the current state Q of the Turing machine. Okay, so that's how our universal Turing machine keeps track of the current state in the execution of the Turing machine. And on the third tape, we have our encoding of the current contents of the single tape that the Turing machine M is executing on. So we have our encoding of A1. We don't need to put the bullets on in. I don't remember if in the notes, maybe I put the bullets in, maybe I don't. I don't care. So you can do it. If you can put the bullets in, you can not. Actually, I'm now hesitating whether to do it or not, but let's not do it. So we'll have. So I may be being inconsistent with my notes here, but never mind. We have the ith position. Anyway, we've got for every character A1 up to AK from the tape alphabet. Some of the, quite a few of these could be blank. It doesn't matter. There might be a whole load of blanks here. Point is, everything outside this must be blank. So every non-blank symbol must be contained in these. But anyway, we've got all the non-blank symbols here. Each one is encoded by a word of length M, was it? I've kind of actually forgotten whether. Yeah, so this was a word of length M, so we've got M symbols here, and so on. And we record where the head position is here. If we put the bullets in, it could point to the bullet to the left. Actually, but at the start, there wouldn't be a bullet. So anyway, but we'll just put the head symbol to point to the left-hand character of the ith encoding here. And we need to have a state of the universal Turing machine. And in my notes, I have a special state snapshot. So a snapshot is like a picture you take on holiday, or a quick picture or snapshot of the screen, like a screenshot is like so a snapshot is like a picture you take of something at the moment. And the point is, this is the point of the state snapshot of the universal Turing machine is it says, now I am in a, we only go to this snapshot when the universal Turing machine is in a configuration that encodes the configuration of the single step machine. So whenever it's a snapshot, it says, I am now encoding one of the configurations in the execution of the single step machine. It's then going to go from this, it's going to do several computation steps, really quite a lot, in order to go to the next snapshot state. And the next snapshot state will be in the encoding of the next step, the next configuration that we get to in the execution of the Turing machine M. So when we execute M, we do one step of computation, takes us to another configuration. Our universal Turing machine is going to do a lot of work and eventually get back to a snapshot state and will say, I've now done the work to take myself to the encoding of the next configuration of M. How's it going to do that? Well, it's going to start from here. It's going to say, okay, I'm in a position. Let's have a look at what the state is. Let's have a look at what the current read character is, store that up in some appropriate state that the universal machine is going to have for dealing with every possible state it can encounter. Or maybe, actually, you don't need to store that up. You've got it here. Sorry, I've forgotten. I'm not sufficiently prepared. I'm rethinking it from start. So actually, what you do, we're here. You scan through the Turing machine, the encoding of the Turing machine, until you get to the transition function. So remember, the transition function was encoded as these square bracket things. You start looking at each instruction, and each time you get to a new instruction, you have a look at the state part and see if it matches where you are in Q. And you have a look at the character part and see if it matches where you are here, AI. If it does, you then know we need to change things, and you then read off from this particular, from the transition function here, you read off what the next Q is, you overwrite it, you read off what the next AI is, you overwrite it, you overwrite it, and then you move the head accordingly, which means moving M states in to the right, M squares to the right, M squares to the left, or staying where you are. And potentially, if you move M squares to the right to a new bit of blank tape here, you need to create a cell that's at the encoding of the blank symbol. Or if you move to the left here, you need to create a new cell. So it's actually not that hard. As a 3-tape machine, it's not that hard. Then once you've done that, reset your head position to the left of the square that you should be pointing at. Make sure everything's reset here and here, and go back into the snapshot state. So we're done. That's all the details you need to know. But if you want to know more, you can have a look at the notes. And if you want to know even more, you can think about it yourself. And we have a universal Turing machine. Good. As a 3-tape machine, we can reduce to a 1-tape machine using the ideas at the beginning of the lecture. So finally, we're in a position to prove Theorem 2. So Theorem 2 was that the language L accept is semidecidable. So we want to define a Turing machine that recognizes the language and accept. So in the exercise classes, you've been programming Turing machines. I'm not going to program this Turing machine, just like I didn't program the universal Turing machine. I'm going to describe as at a high level what the relevant Turing machine does. So this is called S in the notes because it semi-decides the language. So the first thing it does, S reads the input string, let's say the input string is big. So remember, L accept is a language over the universal alphabet. Alphabet with 0, 1, -1, square brackets, and so on. So it reads the input string B and checks to see if this is of the form encoding of a Turing machine and bullet W for some Turing machine, and with some tape alphabet, gamma, and some word, so word W, which is from gamma with the empty square removed. This is a bit complicated, right? You want to see, well, how do we see this? Well, encoding of a Turing machine needs to start with encoding of the state start. So it needs to start as a sequence of zeros, followed by a bullet that gives us the length of the sequence of symbols. So the length of the sequence is the sequence of symbol of minus 1 zeros and 1s that encode the state. We then have the encoding of blank. So that gives us another length. So the first length is L, the second length is N. The length of the encodings that correspond to an individual character. We then have a set of instructions, each one has a specific format. So once you've got these lengths fixed, you check that all the instructions have the right length with the right punctuation in them. That's essentially what you need to do. And having done that, you end the instructions, you get to a bullet. The next bullet tells us I'm starting the input word. Each of those is the encode. The input word is the sequence of encodings of characters, again separated by bullets. Then you check that each of those is the same length as the original, as the M that you settled on at the beginning. And that's what you need to do. So it's a bit complicated. There's a sort of parsing problem from using computer science terminology. But one can make a Turing machine do, one can get a Turing machine to do that. And if V is not of this form, in the case V is not of the form W and S rejects me. We can also, if we want to go into a loop, doesn't really matter what we do, because what we're doing, we want a semi-decidable language, so all that matters is that we accept the string if and only if it's in the language. It doesn't actually matter how we reject something. We can either explicitly reject it or implicitly reject it by a loop or some halting state that's not accept. It doesn't really matter. What does matter, the reason we're doing this is we're making sure that what we're going to do in the case that this is satisfied is we're going to feed our input string to the universal Turing machine. And the whole point of this pre-processing is to make sure we only feed a string to the universal Turing machine if it satisfies this condition, because only if it satisfies this condition do we know what the universal Turing machine is going to do on it. Otherwise, it might do something, the universal Turing machine might end up doing something funny that we want it to do. It's just precaution. It's not even, probably with most definitions of the universal Turing machine, it's not even necessary. But anyway, we can, just to be on the safe side, we'll do this. So in the case that V is of the form N followed by W, we simply run the universal Turing machine. Universal Turing machine on input V. So we simply reset the head of the machine to the left end of V and then carry on as the universal Turing machine. And clearly, by the definition of the universal Turing machine, the universal Turing machine, I already said, simulates the execution of N on W and accepts if and only if N accepts W. So this whole procedure in general is going to accept if and only if the machine N accepts the word W, if and only if this string that we started with is in the language L accept. So we're done. Okay, so we have done the main thing we wanted to do. We defined our language, L-accept, encodings, Turing machines together with encodings of input words that satisfy the property that the Turing machine accepts the input word. So it's 15 minutes, well, it's 14 minutes to 4. I did promise, sorry, not to 4 to 5. I did promise you an early ending. We are going to end early. Just want to mention that using the same techniques, oops, and the camera is now refusing to cooperate. Oh, hang on, no, I'm pressing the wrong button. I thought it was dictating that this should be the end of the lecture. But I do want to give one last example that I'm not going to prove it's semi-decidable but not decidable, but it's now quite easy to do so, having done what we've already done. And I believe this will be an example in the exercise class in 2 weeks' time. Well, I shall make sure that it is. So I'm pretty sure that is going to put it in anyway. So this is a language, the halting language. So one of the famous slogans in computability theory, well, something everybody knows that has been exposed to the culture of computability theory, the halting problem is undecidable. You cannot decide if a program with a given input halts. And we can define that formally. So one way of defining the language M halt is a Turing machine M together with an input W, such that the M encodes a Turing machine, W encodes an input word, and the execution of M halts on W. So it's very similar to L-accept. The only difference is, rather than being concerned, do we end in the accept state, we're concerned with does the computation halt at all, whatever state, whatever halting state it ends in. And L halt is also semi-decidable, but not decidable. It's not totally immediate, but it's not so hard to prove this from what we have already proved today. So you can think about this over the next week and hopefully come up with a solution, and then you'll be prepared for this question in the exercise class next week. But today's exercise class is again in the computer lab in 310, and is going to be continuing programming with Turing machines following on from last week. Okay, so that's everything for today. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm happy to answer questions. Feel free to stay back at the end if you wish to. And